Hello, RAFV. You're listening to the Who's Who with Stu podcast, and I'm Chris Studebaker, CEO of the Realtors Association of the Fox Valley. On this podcast, we'll be chatting with important stakeholders in the Fox Valley community, finding out the scoop and sharing it with you. Let's start with Ron and John Stats and Trends, starring Ron Donovan, chairperson of the Tech Committee, stats nerd and realtor at Keller Williams Infinity, and John Broadbooks, Chief Communications Officer at MRED, where we explore and discuss current housing market stats and what's going on in our local markets.
Hey, Realtor Association of the Fox Valley. It's that time again for Stats and Trends with John and Ron. Let's welcome John Broadbooks, MRED's Chief Communications Officer. John, how are you?
Yeah, it's great to be here, Ron. It's fantastic. And, I really do think that you and I probably need to get an agent.
I'm working on it.
Okay.
Lisa, we'll ask Lisa. She doesn't have anything else to do.
No.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, let's jump in. So inventories were tight last time we talked. Inventories getting any better for us?
No, in fact, it's really probably going in the opposite direction. Well, I guess it depends on which side of the market you're on, right? If you're a seller, it's probably you're feeling pretty confident and it's going in the right direction. But boy, if you're a buyer out there, it's getting even more tough. I looked at the month supply, which is sort of a, how long does it take to sell out the current inventory you would have at the current sales pace? And, when you're looking at McHenry and DuPage and Kendall counties, it's 0.6 of a month. That's all you have in terms of inventory. It's maybe 0.1% higher and 0.2% higher in Kane and DeKalb respectively. But, when you think about it for MRED right now, I ran for all of our markets, we serve 50,000 practitioners, and we saw probably 1.7 months of inventory. And that's the lowest that I could find since MRED was formed in 2008. Wow. And by the way, in 2008, just in case you're wondering, because I know you were wondering, I could read your mind.
It was my next question.
Your next question.
What was inventory in 2008, John?
There you go. It was 17.7 months. But remember, we were, just beginning to, come out of the Great Recession at that point. So
yeah, and
think about that, 1.7 months currently, 17.7 months then, and then even lower in, say, a McHenry, DuPage, or Kendall County was 0.6%. Crazy.
Unbelievable. So barely over 2 to 3 weeks of inventory.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Yeah. And I do not see any sign that necessarily will change. It's certainly not going to change quickly.
Okay. That's what was my next question. So we're kind of looking at this for the short and maybe the medium run. Huh?
Yeah. And what's interesting is, usually right about now, you begin to see more come online, more properties begin to be put on the market as people start thinking about the spring market. And, in a lot of the communities that I looked at, we're not seeing the same number of houses come online that came in previous years.
So what would be a normal percentage of, what would we say, or what are we off? I guess is.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a good question. Kane County, let me pick on Kane County because I think I missed them in the last round. Kane County, for example, was down 16.5% in terms of the new listings coming online, and it's not just a Fox Valley issue, right? I mean, it's statewide. I mean, we had 22,213 homes for sale throughout our entire system. Okay. That's the lowest we've ever recorded.
Unbelievable.
And the most we ever saw was in 2008, again, the Great Recession, where we had 101,000 on the market. Okay. So it really boggles the mind.
So 16.5% off of the number of new listings we were last year, mm-hmm. which was also a solid seller's market and right. Tight, right? So for a buyer, bad and even worse this year.
Yeah, and I ran, I was interesting. So every time I look at a market, I always look at, okay, so what's the average percentage you're getting off the original list price? For so many of our markets, it's right at about 100%, 99%, 98.8%. But what stuck out to me was Kendall County, 101% of original list.
Sale to list price,
the average.
1% over list.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So that tells you just how competitive it really is out there. So, if somebody thought, hey, it's spring, there's going to be more stuff coming on the market, I might have a better shot at it. You're still going to have to be very, very aggressive. I don't see that slowing down.
Yeah, so I have, just to kind of illustrate your point, was involved in 5 multiple offer situations in the last 7 days. Luckily, one of those was a seller. So that's a good seat, but that means 4 others were buyers and we were up against multiple offers. Any relief, insight? What do you think about the next? You kind of already told us, but
yeah, I think it's a short-term versus long-term thing. There are a number of economic factors that are increasingly beginning to play a role. And so let's start with inflation. I haven't seen the March numbers yet. We've seen it. We've had about 4 or 5 months where it's been over 5%. Ron, I don't know if you've been to the gas station, but you're almost having to arrange it. Yeah. So did you arrange your 30-year mortgage for gas?
Yeah, I refied to fill my tank. Yes.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. That's going to show up on your credit report now. So, I mean, it is, and I feel for, so many of the realtors in your organization, because, a lot of them practically live in their cars some days. Right.
Yep.
And I mean, so the costs that they're having are also the costs that consumers are facing right now. And it's not just gas. We're going to see, potentially with the unrest that we're seeing in Ukraine, the invasion in Ukraine, let's call it what it is, that is having a ripple effect on commodity markets, certainly food commodities, but also, some construction materials will be affected. Metals are going to be very, very expensive. So, I don't really see any sign in the short term that inflation is going to come to bay. Now, what does that mean practically for the housing market for your members? Well, I think people still very much want to get in a house. So I'm not doom and gloom on that, certainly not in the short term. I think people are going to be much likely probably to do what you do, Ron, and say, you know what, I'm going to pass up on that Armani suit. And instead, I'm going to get a really nice house that I want. Yeah, I mean, you look like an Armani guy. So I don't know. Maybe you're giving up your Gucci handbag.
You saw that. You saw that.
I did see that. It's very tasteful. Yeah, but I think people generally, they're still they very much want to get into a house. The demand numbers show that it's not really slowing down. And look, this market is, it's such an aggressive market that even a little bit of a slowdown is probably not going to have a huge impact. We're still plenty busy as practitioners.
Okay, well, good. That's great stuff. Thanks for the numbers, sir. Good to see you again today.
Yeah, great to be here. Always enjoy talking to my friends in Fox Valley.
All right, thank you so much, John. We appreciate your time.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. Next up, help me welcome Anneliese Fierstos of the Illinois Realtors Legal Department. She'll be taking us through one of the main questions she receives on the Illinois Realtors Legal Hotline. Anneliese, take it away.
Anneliese Fierstos, and I am the hotline attorney at Illinois Realtors. Some of you reached out to me on the Illinois Realtors webpage, and all of my contact information is on that page. If you log in with your member ID, you can see the 1-800 number to contact the hotline, and my email is there for a direct link. I have been asked to speak on some of the most frequent things that are coming in over the hotline over the course of the months, the past few months. And one consistent topic that is a favorite topic of mine is the accommodations for requests for animals, specifically assistance animals and emotional support animals. In Illinois, there is an act called the Assistance Animal Integrity Act. And it is something that as licensees and managing brokers, you can Google the act because it's a very clear act and it's very well written and is something that you will likely want to be familiar with. Under the Assistance Animal Integrity Act, the legislature has drafted legislation governing any request for an accommodation for an emotional support animal or any other type of a service animal. One of the questions that I get most frequently would be a licensee will ask me, as the listing agent for a property that has a no pets policy, and they receive an application from an individual who has made a request for an allowance for an emotional support animal, can they deny that application because the animal is an emotional support animal and not qualified as a service animal? Well, generally speaking, the answer to that question is no. You cannot deny based upon the fact that the animal is an assistance animal based upon emotional support. You have to apply more analysis. Some housing providers really want to deny those requests to accommodate the emotional support animal because they argue that it is not a legitimate request, and that is not true. The legislation, the Assistance Animal Integrity Act, defines assistance animals to include emotional support animals. Another question that I get quite frequently from licensees who are representing housing providers is whether or not they can ask for an additional security deposit if they choose to accommodate a request for an assistance animal. And that is very clearly a no under the Act. You cannot ask for extra money as a security deposit when you allow the accommodation for the assistance animal. What a homeowner can do is if the animal causes some damage to the property during the course of the lease, then at that point, once the tenant removes themselves from the location, the housing provider can sue for damages if the party is not forthcoming about the damage and they need to pay for carpet cleaning or some damage to floors or something like that. But you cannot ask for additional money up front. Some of the things to keep in mind under the Assistance Animal Integrity Act is that if a housing provider is in receipt of a request for an accommodation of an assistance animal, they may ask for supporting documentation from that applicant that the animal is qualified as an assistance animal. The reason for this is that because there were complaints for many years that parties were abusing the system and going online and just paying for a certificate for an assistance animal. Somebody pay $75 or $100 to an online service and they just print out a certificate. And so what the legislature did was they drafted this act so that it very clearly states that any certification needs to come from a party that the applicant is in a therapeutic relationship with. And they might be, and that the licensee or the owner can ask for verification of the therapeutic relationship. And so that is to avoid somebody abusing the system and just printing out a certificate without having to meet any burden of proof whatsoever. I do tell licensees and homeowners to be very cautious in making requests for certification. For example, if somebody asks for an assistance animal, not an emotional support animal, and they ask for the accommodation, and it is very, very apparent that the person who's making the application and the request has a disability and the animal is servicing that disability, for example, a seeing eye dog. At that point, that would be a situation where you would really want to talk to legal counsel before you made any request that this animal was certified, because you don't want to step over the line. You need to be cautious in the request that you make. Some housing providers have called me with a more unique question because an applicant will actually request for certification for more than one animal. And if they do that, the housing provider or the licensee can make the request. They can return or respond with the question that they need to have certification for each animal for whom the request is being made. So one certification likely does not have to cover two assistance animals. Another thing to keep in mind is that when the applicant is making the request for accommodation, the housing provider can require that documentation be in writing, and that once the verification is made that the applicant is in a therapeutic relationship with the person who created the documentation, at that point, if the housing provider or the licensee feels like the documentation that's been provided or the information that is provided is not sufficient, At that point, I do recommend that they talk to an attorney to have documentation reviewed before they go back to the applicant for asking for any additional information, because at that point, things start to get gray, and a misstep could actually, somebody could accidentally get themselves into a situation where they are being perceived as discriminating against a protected class. And at that point, they are vulnerable to an accusation that they have violated the Fair Housing Act. Another interesting question that comes up quite frequently under the Assistance Animal Integrity Act is asking for accommodation for a different type of animal. Again, that's going to be a question of fact. So if somebody requests an accommodation for an animal and the housing provider feels that that animal might be dangerous to other tenants in the same building, at that point, there is language in that act that does provide that if an animal might pose a danger or threat to health or safety of other tenants, there's the possibility that the request for accommodation could be denied. But that is not something that a licensee or a housing provider should determine on their own, just based upon the language of the act. Again, that is something that they should go to legal counsel and have that weighed out and a little bit of research done. Because, for example, a request for an accommodation of an assistance animal that's been certified, that is, a breed that commonly comes up is a pit bull, that alone is not enough of a reason to deny the request for accommodation. At that point, that's if the housing provider is not comfortable and they feel that it might be a threat to health or safety, they should not make that determination on their own. They should employ legal counsel for some assistance. Again, the Assistance Animal Integrity Act is an act that licensees and housing providers should be very familiar with. I think that during a course of a long term of property management, everybody is going to run into these requests for accommodation, and the hotline gets calls about this act probably 2 to 3 times a week. So it's a frequent issue across the state of Illinois. So I encourage everybody to become familiar with that act. And if you have some other questions, please feel free to call me up with a question on the hotline. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Anneliese. Great information. Up next, I'm talking with Mayor Kevin Burns, the Mayor of Geneva. Always fun to talk to. Kevin tells us about the best parts about being mayor, challenges and opportunities in the Geneva housing market, and what the future holds for the great city of Geneva. Help me welcome Mayor Kevin Burns.
We're talking today with Mayor Kevin Burns, the longest serving mayor in Geneva history.
Yes, indeed. Good to see
So
you.
you only have 20 years more to go to catch
right.
Shelke,
That's
Mayor
right.
Shelke of Batavia.
I text him every day saying, I'm right behind you.
You were first elected in 2001, and this is your 22nd year you're going into, right?
I'm going into, correct.
Right, that's awesome. Previously, you served as an alderman on the City Council and an appointed member of the Plan Commission and the Historical Preservation Commission, and as a trustee of the Public Library Board.
That's right.
We're in the Geneva Public
we are,
Library
exactly.
today. Beautiful building. Professionally, Burns has worked in the nonprofit sector, serving such organizations as the Muscular Dystrophy Association, U.S. Olympic Committee, and Special Olympics. Currently, he is the Midwest Regional Director with Fortius Consulting. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Chris. Good to see you.
Absolutely. So we're going to talk about a bunch of topics today, but let's start off with something kind of light and talk to me a little bit about what, you've been mayor for 20 years. What do you like most about being mayor of Geneva?
It's a question I get often, mostly from students. And I would argue that the most enjoyable aspect is visiting with students at the schools. When you receive the questions that students ask, they're often, almost by design, more probing, such as, why do you do this? How much money do you make? Is it a full-time job? Do you have security? Do you have your own house? Do you get a limo? I mean, all these fascinating questions. And of course, it's always fun to answer it in a light tone. But most of the students, I think, in Geneva seldom have had direct connection with a elected official other than reading about or hearing about, either through their family or news or what have you. So to make that connection, to me, is selfish in the sense that I want to know who these students are, and it's fun to watch them grow up.
Sure.
And to maintain that connection so that when and if they have a question, a curiosity, a homework assignment, which is happening right now, they call me or they text me, and I love that. I love that connection.
What about kind of flipping it on its head?
Sure.
What's been the biggest challenge to being mayor?
The biggest challenge remains, as it did in 2001, is managing expectations of the community. Oftentimes, when a community grows like ours has, as most of you may know who are tuning into this podcast, from 1990 to 2000, Geneva grew exponentially, both in home sales, both in population, commercial impact, industrial impact, what have you. And by advancing a community in that regard so quickly, the demands on expectations become ever so salient. And it's a lot of times it's comments such as, I moved here from, and where I came from, they did it this way. Why aren't we doing it this way? Or, I pay a lot in taxes, therefore I expect A, B, C, D, E. So it's a lot of patience, a lot of education, a lot of accepting the criticism humbly, and trying to explain as best I can why we do what we do and why I believe we do it with great fidelity to costs.
So if you take that like one step further, then that means there's things out there that probably people don't realize. So what is in your 20 plus years of alderman and mayor, what do you think are your biggest accomplishment that people may not know about? Like, what are you most proud of?
You know, that calls for a lot of inside baseball.
Sure.
And a lot of folks, you know, we don't care how you do it, just get it done. I'll give you a perfect example. When I became mayor in 2001, we had approximately 15 restaurants in town. One of my pledges during that campaign was to reimagine Geneva as a destination not just for shopping, but after 5 o'clock we want people lingering and hanging out, both entertainment-wise and restaurant opportunity. We now have 150 restaurants in Geneva.
Oh, wow.
Our downtown used to be that place where you'd shop, and when you wanted to go out for some entertainment or dining, other than the few restaurants downtown, and again, remember, there was no Geneva Commons back then. There was very little Randall Road back then. You dined in St. Charles or elsewhere. Mm-hmm. So we thought, well, heck, why don't we keep these folks here, including our own folks? The first thing we did was we waived a rule that required additional parking if you wanted to open a restaurant. And that, boom, that helped restaurateurs take a second look at our community. And that has succeeded to this day.
When you think about the projects that are out there,
sure.
And we'll get into some COVID conversations or economic stuff in a bit, but how are we doing with vacancies and weathering the storm of some of those things?
We're doing remarkably well. Mm-hmm. I can tell you this, and this is a fact. There are more interested parties in wanting to open a business, whether it be a retail store, service organization, entertainment spot, or restaurant in Geneva than there are vacancies. Our economic development team receives calls almost daily. I own a shop in, hypothetically, Glen Ellen, or St. Charles, or Batavia, and I want to expand. Do you have a spot open for me? Well, right now we don't. We do have some spots available. Well, it's not really fitting what I need. So we also often spend time marketing those spots. And as you well know, a lot of those spots are antiquated in terms of its infrastructure. So it makes it a little bit more challenging to relocate someone as well, which of course then calls for some sort of public-private partnership oftentimes.
Sure. I recently participated in the King County Business Leaders Roundtable
Yes.
as part of CMAP's Regional Economic Development
Yes.
Collaboration. It was interesting to me. I mean, that conversation spurred very much sort of the workforce development component, but
Exactly.
part of the nuance was what kind of opportunities or incentives are regional, versus local. So you were just talking about that, so we'll kind of pick on that a little bit.
Sure.
So how do you differentiate Geneva from other communities? What kind of projects are you out there looking for as a city?
First and foremost, we want to make certain that the environment within our community, whether it be retail, whether it be entertainment, whether it be restaurant, whether it be industrial, is appropriate to continue to not only maintain and sustain whom we have here doing business, but also those who might want to come in, expand, or start anew. Our greatest asset right now is the fact that we have the lowest electric rates of any community within Northern Illinois. With regard to the industrial users, that's huge.
Sure.
That's huge. We're also, as you know, in terms of our industrial park, the access to major arterial roads is such that they can head north, head south, head west or east very quickly. On a smaller scale, people continue to want to be in downtown Geneva because downtown Geneva works. It always has. And I'll give you a statistic. The Geneva Commons, we're all familiar with it. Great place. We love having the Commons here. Generates about $100 million a year in sales tax. $100 million a year in sales, in sales.
Sales tax.
Downtown Geneva, approximately $97 million in sales.
Wow.
We talk about pedestrian traffic. We talk about vehicular traffic. We got it all. It's a matter of finding the right fit in the right building that's vacant for the right product mix to help serve the, I would argue, more eclectic and discerning buyers.
We're talking today with Geneva Mayor Kevin Burns on a variety of topics interested to realtors and members of the community. As you talk more about the advantages to locating for commercial reasons in Geneva, what is the build out component of Geneva? Like how much room is left for new housing?
It's a great question. The short answer is not much. Geneva was founded in 1835 in an 8 square block area. Fast forward to 2022, we're about 10 square miles. That's it. We don't have a whole heck of a lot of room for new subdivisions, as it were. So we have discovered that folks are a little bit more discerning in where they want to live and how they want to live. And we've seen developments come in where there are 22 homes. We've seen developments being proposed that are going up in terms of condominiums or apartments or what have you. Because the reality is, all that vacant land that the old days, when the developers would come in and say, good, I can put in 200-300 homes, doesn't exist in Geneva. Simply doesn't exist. So now we're focusing on, let's take care of what we have, as opposed to let's start sending out markers saying, build all you want.
So one of the things we worked on with you and
Yes.
the city was our Inclusionary Housing Ordinance. The program itself was, it's not that old. Can you tell us how that's been going and what, if you were to grade it, like how, what kind of grade would you give it and how impactful has it been?
The debate was good. It was a good, solid debate. We turned to the Realtors Association for help and assistance. We have an extraordinarily dedicated, professional, and well-educated and inspired professional staff. But oftentimes, the council, while they are equally as dedicated, professional, and well-educated, we turn to outside sources to help us. By turning to the Realtors Association, we discovered that there was an opportunity not just to create an inclusionary ordinance, but also to create a inclusionary, for lack of a better word, incentive plan.
Sure.
And that's what Geneva has. We have an incentive plan for diverse housing. So instead of putting it in writing and codified, we created a document that says anyone and everyone who's interested in building in Geneva housing and wants to consider diversifying their housing stock, whether it be affordable, etc., here's the plan. Come to us. We are willing, we are able, and we are interested partners in achieving that goal.
Fantastic. We're talking today with Geneva Mayor Kevin Burns about a variety of topics, and one of the topics I think is, maybe we need to touch on is that the 15 days to stop the spread. Here we are in,
When was that?
2022.
Yeah.
I can't even count the days. But from the standpoint of opportunity costs and some of those things for 2 years, how kind of tell us your story. So,
Sure.
2 years ago, the pandemic happened. How did that impact local government? How did that impact, what you guys have done and what have we not been able to do because of basically the pandemic and what we've been going through?
Sure. I can remember the day very, very well. We received the news and we immediately called, or I should say this, we immediately began operating the emergency services plan of the city. I met with our Mayor Pro Tem, Craig Maladra, and our department heads in the basement, if you will, of the fire station headquarters off of East Side Drive. And we declared an emergency. We then called a special city council meeting where the council then endorsed that emergency order. And the first thing we did as a council was to eliminate $10+ million from our budget. Because we, like most other communities, locally and otherwise, really truly believed at the time that we were going off a cliff. Sales tax, property tax, services, you name it. The good news is it didn't happen as we anticipated, but we reacted in a way that preserved our financial success so that we didn't have to make draconian decisions. Now, as we prepare our budget for the 2022-2023 season, we're starting to see a restorative action that we can now make capital improvements. We can now do other things that we postponed deliberately because we were concerned. Bottom line, we anticipated a 20% reduction in revenues. We are anticipating probably upwards of maybe 3% total. So very lucky, no question about it. Very lucky.
So what are some of those projects that are going to be restored and come online?
Some of them are rather boring. I mean, it's reintroducing the entire street repair program back to its original glory of $2+ million a year. Replacing, ready for this? Replacing railings on the State Street Bridge. Replacing cable programs that help prevent electric outages. Investing more in our utilities. All that stuff that, while it's very important, most people don't see, but we thought it would best to postpone in case the emergency struck us like we thought. And now that we know we can still succeed and that we did a good job being good stewards with the revenue, now we can move forward and start making those improvements.
So from a city, from a municipal standpoint, you guys are moving forward. The city of Geneva is moving forward. You know, if we want to do air quotes around normal, sure. I mean, revenues are going to be back up.
Absolutely, revenues are
up. Doing work again.
Exactly.
People are moving and coming in.
Exactly.
Okay.
We have for many years did well with very little. Our facilities are old. We have staffing demands. We have all sorts of issues that we've postponed for a while. We cannot postpone those anymore, period. And because we have survived or perhaps endured the pandemic, now we can look with clear eyes that here's where we need to make those investments. And we need to make those investments not for tomorrow, not for next year, not for 3 years from now, but let's face it, for the next 20+ years. At minimum, the next 20+ years.
So we're talking today with Geneva Mayor Kevin Burns, and when I asked you the question, before about, something you're most proud of that maybe most people don't know about it, I really thought you were going to go with some of your sustainability initiatives. You and I've had that conversation before, and I was surprised to know and learn a little bit about that. But you kind of lit up when you talked about it, so I thought that, maybe you can tell a little bit about that.
Well, the sustainability programs that we have in Geneva are reflective of where this world is going. We've taken a lead with regard to several programs that make our little corner of the world better for future generations. Whether it be expanding our portfolio of renewables from, I think it was 8% to some 27% in the last 4 years. We have more renewable energy in Geneva in terms of percentage of our portfolio than the state of Illinois does as the percentage of their portfolio. We are constantly exploring opportunities to, whether it be redevelopment, whether it be fresh development, whether it be investments or purchases, to do it in a sustainable fashion. The council is all in on this, and most importantly, Chris, the community's in on this. And when I talk about my connection with students, whether they be high school students, middle school or younger, they too are all in on this. And oftentimes those questions are asked. What are you doing to make this world a better place in terms of the environment? And I love those questions.
That's fantastic. So when you think about, we talked about kind of getting back to normal
Sure.
or getting back up. Geneva's always been a great community events city, right? To your knowledge, are we all back in all the events and public events going to be happening close to normal? Or
I
what
think
they were
close to
pre-20?
normal is a good phrase.
Okay.
In an average year,
I'm going to coin that T-shirt,
Yeah.
close to
I
normal.
like that, man. I need a double XL. Prior to COVID, Geneva's population would expand, ready for this, 20-fold in a normal year because of all the festivals. Swedish Days, Christmas Walk, Festival of the Vine, the Concordia de Elegance car show, all that stuff. We had 500,000 people coming to Geneva every year because of the festivals that the Chamber put on, other private organizations put on, and the city collaborated with. Since COVID, those have dropped off precipitously. We're starting to see that return. There is caution in terms of planning too much on the off chance we have to restrict.
Sure.
But there's confidence that as we move into the spring of 2022, and all the signs indicate that Omicron is starting to wane, we're confident that this spring and summer we're going to see bustling people throughout our community celebrating again what I think we do very well.
So every cast, newscast, streaming cast, you know, we all want to scoop.
Yeah, scoops
What,
are good.
you know, is there anything exciting in Geneva that you want to tell us about? Any project or anything coming around?
I will tell you this, there is rising interest to the point of challenging us to be responsive to the demands for increased retail, increased industrial. Folks wanted to open a second business. It's amazing. It's amazing. And while we can sit back and say, well, of course, it's Geneva. The reality is that these men and women leading these organizations, whether it be a small retail shop or a huge industrial development, have confidence again that not only can they invest in the future, but a good place to do so is in this little hamlet we call Geneva. So we're very excited about it. I can guarantee you this. This year, calendar year, 2022, is going to be one of the busiest in Geneva with respect to new development. And that doesn't mean the city that we know and love changes. It means that those opportunities that we haven't yet seen come to fruition are going to come to fruition. Mm-hmm. And it's going to be not only responsible engagement from the citizens, but of course the council as well, to ensure they do so in the way that's consistent with our comprehensive plan and of course our vision for Geneva.
So when I look about just kind of sticking downtown a little bit,
Sure.
You've got this fabulous facility at the Geneva Library where we're at right now.
Beautiful.
You've got the old building that's still over there. It has some historical parts to it,
Mm-hmm.
which presents some challenges as well as what kind of tenant you're looking for. Do you have any updates on what's happening with that building or what the interest is there?
I know this, that the Geneva Library Board of Trustees interviewed recently multiple brokers to help market that building. I do not know whether they've made that choice as to who to help lead that marketing campaign. They have been gracious to confer with us oftentimes about, what is it you want to see there? Our position is this: whatever helps drive the energy to and complements what currently exists, we're all in. And to your point, Chris, the library, and I served on the library board when the expansions happened there. 1,000 square feet of that library is, quote, considered, for all practical purposes, our Carnegie Library. Mm-hmm. The remainder is all additions. Whether or not a future user wants to raise part of that building, modify part of that building, or leave it as is to be determined. And that's where then the council comes into play, because we have to, of course, review and approve all the plans. But that's very exciting, very exciting. More people downtown, more energy downtown means a more successful downtown. And that's what we're striving for.
Fantastic. Well, Mayor, we've had a great relationship thus far since you've been mayor and beyond that. So we look forward to more years to come with that.
Absolutely.
Have a
Thank you very
great
much.
week. Thank
Thanks
you.
for all you do and your entire team at the Realtors Association.
Absolutely.
We appreciate it.
Mayor Burns.
Thank you.